Baruch Hashem, to commemorate the completion of my workbench build, I have decided to make what I am calling the YouTube edit of the workbench build. Come join me and watch me perfectly put together this workbench. I start off this project by marking each of the 2x4s with a letter to correspond with the instructions that I purchased from Rex Kruger. In truth, I only use these markings for the legs, I believe. I pretty much just grabbed a bunch of 2x4s later on in the process. I didn't really have a workshop set up at this point, so here you can see me just working on the ground of the garage with my miter saw. Here you can see me measuring out one of the 4 2x4s that are going to be used in each of the legs of the workbench. I used this dolly as a stop block, and it was actually the best stop block I had throughout the entire project. Here is my son helping me measure out the length of the 2 front legs that will eventually be mitered. Unfortunately, I lost the footage of me making those 2 cuts. I am now measuring out the angle of those miters in the front legs. Now I'm cutting those miters. Time to glue up those front legs. Now it's time to start measuring the 2x4 pieces that I am going to be using on the back legs. You'll notice the fine camera work that my son is doing as he's holding the camera as I measure and cut the legs. This was a lot of fun as my children helped me to glue the first part of the back legs. Squeeze. Squeeze. There you go. Good job. Now I go ahead and glue up the second part of the back legs. I use referential measurements here, taking an actual cutoff of a 2x4 to get the spacing correct for the back legs. You'll also notice that I did not upgrade the lighting in my garage yet, so the lighting isn't that great right here. Time to plane the four sides of the four legs. I use my table saw to do this using a trick of the straight edge on one side. I make a couple of cuts in this montage that is considered unsafe. The unsafe practice is to actually pull the legs from the back end of the table saw. Luckily, nothing bad happened there, but that is not something that is recommended. Some dados need to be cut into the legs so that they can properly be put together. So here I am marking which leg combinations, front and back, go together, and then I am going to be marking out where I need to cut the dados. I am now raising up the blade of my table saw to the height that I want the dado to be. Now, I don't have a dado stack for my table saw, and to be quite honest, I don't think I'm going to get a dado stack for my table saw. I would prefer to use a router table and use the router bit to hog out most of the material. What do you think of that opinion? Should I get a dado stack? Would it be better than using a router table to hog out all this material? Please leave a comment below with your opinion. Since I don't already have a router table set up, I'm going to use the good old trick of running the wood through the table saw a million times to create the dado. Time to measure out the 2 crossbeams for the legs. Okay, now make the line. Good job. Now we cut the crossbeams. Let's go ahead and glue and screw the crossbeams to the front and back legs of the workbench. Of course, this being the YouTube edit, this all happened perfectly all on the first try. Using referential measurements, I am now marking out the top stretcher. And now I'm cutting the top stretcher. I am now measuring out the notches that need to be cut on the top stretchers. Here I'm marking the legs and the stretcher to ensure that they are the right stretcher to the right pair of legs. I use a jigsaw to cut out those notches. Time to glue and screw in the top stretchers. You'll notice here that I'm using a clamp to get some of the legs into square so that it can properly fit the top stretcher. I don't have to do this with the other legs. You'll notice here that I am using a corded drill instead of the cordless battery-operated drills. This really upped my game, and I really enjoy using the corded drills so much more than the battery-operated drills. The corded drills have so much more power, and I never have to worry about the battery running out of juice. Now it's time to start measuring for the aprons. Let's cut those aprons. Now I need to measure and mark out the angles of the miters on the front apron. I'm going to be honest with you, these angles, this marking was just okay. The widthwise worked very well, but the angle itself, it didn't exactly sit properly, and when it was all said and done, the apron, when it was sitting flush with the miter, was actually a little low, so I had to assemble the workbench upside down, which you may notice, so that the top could be level and it floats slightly above the miters. So just something to be aware of when you're doing this yourself. I use a jigsaw to cut out those mitered dados. Here I am marking and measuring out where the key and the ribs are going to go on the workbench. Again, I go ahead and cut out the dados using the good old running it through the table saw blade a billion times. Even though I put the two aprons back to back along the table saw in order to try and keep the front and back aprons level so that the ribs and the key would fit perfectly, I still had a little small variance, so I used a chisel to try and clean that up a little bit. I also used the chisel to try and clean up some of the unevenness that the table saw blade made on the tops of the dados. You'll see that in a little bit. As an amateur woodworker, I have a little tear out here using my chisel, but it's okay. I will just go ahead and make sure that that face is facing the inside, and nobody will know about it except for the people watching this video. I use my block plane for some final touches. Time to measure out the key. This went smoothly the very first time. Let's ignore the fact that I tried to use my new-to-me bandsaw to make these cuts, but failed miserably, so now I am using my jigsaw to cut out these notches. Please excuse the vibration on this shot. The tripod of my camera was up against the table and you can see the result. We can finally assemble the workbench, and this went off completely without a hitch, once again on my first time. Thank you, YouTube editors. Time to start clamping this workbench together with these squares so that I can try and get this workbench as square as possible. I didn't use any glue and just decided to screw in the aprons to the workbench. This allows me to make any modifications to the workbench and possibly take off the aprons if I need to. Behold, a fully assembled workbench carcass. Now that the legs are properly screwed in, let's attach and screw in the key. Onward to measuring out the ribs. Now let's cut those ribs to length. Once again, we use referential measurements so that we can cut out the notches in the ribs. You may notice here that what I am marking is what will be cut away. That way, the notch heights are going to be correct. Since I figured these ribs together would be too thick for my jigsaw to cut through, I decided to once again run the boards through my table saw a million times to get notch cut out correctly. But I'll save you from seeing this done 4 times. Once I'm complete with this, we'll move on to the dry fit. For the first time in this build, I did not need to use YouTube magic to make sure that this dry fit happened on the first try. Amazingly enough, I got these ribs cut correctly on the first try. Now I attached the ribs. Again, I didn't use glue and just screwed these in, just in case I needed to make any modifications to the workbench. We're finally in the home stretch, as now I cut the top boards of the workbench. I had a little snafu here, and I forgot to press the record button when I was attaching the top boards. Luckily, I did check the camera and was able to capture this part of the attaching of the top boards. 2 things you'll notice here. 1, I picked up a second quarter drill, so that way I used one drill to drill and the other drill to screw in the screw. I also made sure to countersink the screws very deeply into this board because I could already tell that the boards on this top were cupped and a little twisted, and I was going to have to flatten the top. Having the screws put in there deeply will make sure that I can flatten the top and flatten it more than once if I need to. You'll also notice that the top is overhanging just by a couple of inches. Now I did this on purpose because now that you see it where it's going to be, I need room for the dust port of the table saw so that I can get dust extraction in there. You will also notice that the workbench is just below the slide of the table saw. That way I can use my miter sled or any crosscut sled or any other sled I choose to design, so I will be able to push the piece completely through the saw. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please tell your friends about us. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and like and comment on this video. A Woodworker's Journey is brought to you by the generous support of people like you. You can support this program by going to our Patreon page at www.patreon.com/AELLC to become a friend of the show. We could not do this without you. Thank you for your time, and I hope you found today's episode entertaining.